Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at NAFA's National Conference. This morning's plenary features journalist Tiffany Cross in a moderated discussion with NAFA Executive Vice President Nikitra Bailey. They will discuss recent attacks on DEI and how the disinformation campaign is wreaking havoc on all progressive agendas. The fight for inclusion and belonging is not only in our neighborhoods, but extends to our college admissions, our employment, and our society as a whole. Building an equitable future with the foundation of housing fairness must include diverse perspectives and contributions where everyone feels that they belong and have the ability to thrive. This plenary session will build a narrative framework on the critical importance of DEI and belonging as essential to progress for the nation. I am delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Tiffany Cross, and moderator of today's discussion, Nikitra Bailey. Tiffany D. Cross is a journalist, TV host, podcast host, author, and speaker. She is the current co-host of iHeartMedia's Native Land Pod, which debuted in 2024 on Apple as the #1 downloaded podcast in America across all categories, where she breaks down news and culture of the week. Tiffany also hosts Across Generations, a broadcast show and podcast with Will Packer Productions and iHeartMedia, which launched in March of this year, where she focuses on a variety of topics from a multi-generational perspective. Tiffany previously hosted The Cross Connection on MSNBC, where she averaged 4.6 million viewers a month. Nikitra Bailey serves as the Executive Vice President at the National Fair Housing Alliance. She leads the organization's public policy division while providing oversight of the communications and resource development divisions. Recently, she was recognized by the Washingtonian as one of the 500 leaders shaping policy in DC, and she was appointed as an inaugural member of the Federal Housing Finance Agency's Federal Advisory Committee on Affordable, Equitable, and Sustainable Housing. I am very excited to hear the discussion between these two dynamic leaders, so I'm going to turn it over without further ado to Nikitra and Tiffany.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome, Tiffany. We are so delighted to have you, and we are just going to jump in this morning and get started.
Thank you for having me. It was a little quiet when we came out. I want to make sure everybody's awake. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you guys, so I hope y'all are excited for the conversation we're about to have. I'm very energetic, so energy's contagious, so I want to spread some good, exciting energy today. Exciting times to be alive. Good thing there's nothing going on politically.
So, Tiffany, we know that land and ownership and housing are the foundation of opportunity in our country. And we know that in the United States, the only people who could initially own property and participate in our democratic systems were white males. Today, why is it important for us to have a multiracial democracy where we can have broad participation and an opportunity for all people to thrive?
Well, first, thank you for the question, and thank you guys for having me this morning. I'm very honored to be here with you all. And this conversation, I think, is so important and necessary. And so I want to thank you first for the honesty in that question, acknowledging our history, because there are too many efforts to erase that very history that we still contend with today. So I would say it's important to accept that because it's happening whether they like it or not. It is going. And last decade, from the year 2010 to 2020, was the first decade that there was a decline in the white population. And so when you look at the changing demographics of the country, the Asian American Pacific Islander community is the fastest growing community in this country. For the first time, the Latino community eclipsed the Black community as the largest people of color when it comes to voters. Now, not registered voters, but eligible voters. The indigenous population continues to be integral when it comes to some of those key elections across the country. And of course, Black folks are the architects of this country. And so this effort to stop that is really an exercise in futility. I think some people look at this like it's, a revolution, which I suppose it is, but truly it's an evolution. So people can either get with it or get fossilized, and I'm really indifferent for the folks who want to get fossilized, to be honest with you. But listen, we can't be but so indifferent. This is me talking. I trust for people like you all to not be indifferent. I'm a little exhausted. I imagine some of you all are too, because just because these numbers are changing, I don't confuse that with the power structure that's changing, which I know we'll probably get into that too.
Absolutely. And thank you for just letting us understand how we are just connected, because I think oftentimes people don't get that point. And yesterday, when Dr. King was here with us, she reminded us of that. And I just want to read this quote from Dr. King because I think it's so relevant. "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And I think sometimes people don't appreciate that point, that we are literally tied at the hip.
Is that Bernice King?
Yes.
Why y'all didn't invite me yesterday? I would have loved to see Bernice King. I want to point out something there, because she's so profound, and I love her. And I think that's such a critical point, because my life's mission in everything I do, which makes it easy to say yes to things and no to things, my life's mission is to live in service to my community and to always, whatever I touch, fight for the equality and liberation of Black folks and all people of color. The unique thing about that is it benefits everybody. Even pockets of poor white populations across this country benefit when there are policies that impact positively people of color. But there are so many people where it's not just, I think we have a landscape now where if we are achieving anything, there are pockets of people who think that means you're taking from me. For you to have, I am losing. And I want to say the devil is a lie, because we're not winning. And just because a knife is coming 6 inches out of our back, but it's still in there 3 inches, there's still a lot of work to be done. So if people stop looking at it like, I don't want you to have, because sometimes it's not even that you're doing better than a pocket of people, you could just be doing the same. Mm-hmm. And they don't like that. There are people who feel like, how dare you even live how I live? And that's not something, I don't depend on those folks to change their minds or attitude. They have to be pushed. Policy has to be pushed. The infrastructure of this country has to change.
Great, great. And this brings us to where we were following the murders of Mr. George Floyd and Ms. Breonna Taylor in 2020. The nation's consciousness seemingly rose, and some people even said we were in a post-racial reckoning. There was this expressed understanding by many in government, business, diverse communities that we needed to shift and we needed to do something different. And there seemed to be this will to go forward. Fast track to today, those efforts are now being aggressively attacked. And my first question to you is, how did we get here? And then what I really want you to hone in on is, why were we not prepared for the pushback?
So I may disagree with your question a little. We were prepared, I think. Not only were we prepared, we anticipated. Mm-hmm. Let me first say this whole idea of a racial reckoning, that came from predominantly white-run newsrooms. It was a coined phrase that was something cute to say at the time and made people feel comfortable about some of the things that they were doing. It was almost a fashion statement. Mm-hmm. It meant Ben and Jerry's was going to come out with an ice cream with a cute little Black Lives Matter title, and, corporations are going to offer 2-for-1 something on Fridays for the racial reckoning. And I think as Black folks in this country, we are far too familiar with the swinging pendulum. And so I think we all braced for what was to come. This isn't the first time. You look at what happened in 1963 after President Kennedy passed the Civil Rights Act. You can take it further back and look at what happened in this country post-Reconstruction in the 1850s when white lawmakers literally said that the equality of Black folks was a threat to the country. So I could talk for an hour about how we got here, but those are just some bullet points. But truly, you can go each incident in America, there's always been a swinging pendulum. I remember watching the Rodney King beating, and this wasn't the first time that we saw a man be murdered on television. And I think there were too many people who thought, well, we sent Derek Chauvin to prison, so even Stephen, and we knew better. Of course we knew better. And even when you look at what happened in recent history, that is now being summarily erased by a lot of folks in the media who have an incredible amount of empathy for racist. And so during that time, even with George Floyd, we had a president at the time who was ready to release the military to quote unquote dominate the streets. We had white Republican lawmakers making incredibly racist statements. We had Senator Tim Cotton from Arkansas make incredibly derogatory comments about the unrest that was happening at the time. And so I think if there was anything, there was a quick little sigh of relief. If you're running a race and you get to stop for 10 seconds and take a drink of water and breathe, that's how Black folks felt. Because we knew what was to come because we're too familiar with this history. We were braced for it. And so a lot of people took advantage of opportunity, I think. But I don't think there was any of us who thought, man, I'm so happy racism is over. We knew that there was work to do. So what some call a racial reckoning, I would call a kickoff to an even more intense backlash to equity and equality in this country.
Thank you. So with that said, how do we drive home to the public, to the opponents of DEI and belonging, that it's not enough for the nation to stop overt discrimination? That we actually have to address the reality that our nation's policies and history of discrimination against Indigenous, Black, Latino, AAPI, women, and other marginalized groups went on for so long and is so ingrained in our culture. So again, I may have a different attitude. So I take a bit of an issue with the question because I would say, Nikitra, I don't spend my time trying to convince opponents of DEI of anything. I am at a space and age in life where I'm beyond trying to convince anyone of my humanity. It has never worked. You could point out any time in history. I've never seen it happen. I think our energy, our resources would all be better spent organizing those of us with a righteous anger to overthrow these types of policies. A lot of these terrible policies, I want y'all to know I'm trying really hard not to swear, so you're welcome. A lot of these policies, they bubble up from the state legislature. A lot of these policies at the local level are backed and funded by powerful people who convince poor people, look at what they're doing to you. And so I just haven't seen at any point in history where that tactic has worked to convince those people, hey, it's not to you, it's us. You need to stop looking at it like us versus them. It's we. You is we, People don't like to see themselves that way. But to that point, when we started to see the attacks on affirmative action, when we saw that it wasn't going in the right way, we haven't heard all of our traditional allies, including some of the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, get loud and get mad about that issue.
Yeah, we didn't hear from one of the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action, Justice Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. We want to keep it all the way real. So yes, I think there are a lot of people who should be advocates. One of the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action are white women. And I think, again, history in this country would show us if I have to depend on the political whims of white women for my survival, R.I.P. to Tiffany, because that, and it's unfortunate. And I don't think it's for us to figure that out. I remember in 2016, after the election results came in, and a white acquaintance of mine was saying just how outdone she was by the results. And I emailed her back and said, yeah, conversations need to be happening. And she said, okay, great. When do you want to talk? I said, not with me, with each other. It's not for me, the same way they get on TV and say, how many of them grew up without fathers and look at the unrest and they're tearing everything up. The same way that I'm responsible somehow for every decision and action a black person makes, white women talk to each other. Talk to your grandmother, your cousin, your sister, the people who are sitting at Thanksgiving table making racist comments or saying something inappropriate or voting against their interests. That's not for me. I can't carry that community as well. So I think everybody has to take a little responsibility for that. So yes, again, I would say that's not where I'm going to invest my resources or my energy, but I encourage other people to do that because something does have to change at some point. I think we're seeing the infrastructure of this country bend. Because we're forcing it, and so the country has to bend, and we all know what happens to things that don't bend.
Absolutely, thank you. And we also have to talk about our nation's history, which has become so toxic these days. We're not comfortable sitting in and really talking about our history. And do you think this move to not be open about our nation's history is response to the outcry of the young people, right? They inspired even Mr. John Lewis, our great congressman, after the unfortunate murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Young people of this nation rose up and said no. They were the courageous ones on those front lines pushing us forward. Do you think the pushback to us really appreciating our history is connected to the reality that their consciousness has been raised and they dream of a different future?
I certainly hope so. I think every generation dreamt of a different future. When I was younger, I hate to sound, I want to come out here and be so hopeful, but when I think about it, because I remember going to school with kids who were also outraged after things happened. They were outraged after Rodney King. And then other things would happen and they weren't so outraged, or they just didn't understand. There was always a divide. And so I hope that young people hold on to the anger and fight that they have for as long as possible. But people age and things, people align. And so I don't have a lot of hope for everyone to keep the same level of righteous anger that they have now. I hope they do. But like I said, people, at the end of the day, people are who they are. And as they age, sometimes they, change their affiliation and outlook. The pushback, though, I would say about confronting who and what America is, I think that is so important because it's not really pushback, it's accepting a truth. And there are so many people who believe a fantasy about America. A good friend of mine, Michael Harriot, wrote an amazing book called Black AF History. And so often through this book, he asks, what is America? Is it a graveyard of bones of people who, tried to create equality? I want to actually read what he says exactly, if you all will permit me, because I think it's so poignant. If I can find it. I'm rude going through my phone while I'm up on stage, but I want to get it right. He talks about, I found it. So he talks about, I keep it on me because I literally read this quote all the time. And he talks about what people believe America to be. And he says, the story of America is fantastical, overwrought, and a fictive tale. It is a fantasy where Christopher Columbus discovered a land that he'd never set foot in. It is the story of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower building a new nation. It is George Washington's cherry tree and Abraham Lincoln's log cabin. It is the story of slaves who spontaneously teleported themselves here with nothing but strong backs and a brain full of Negro spirituals. It is Betsy Ross's sewing kit and Paul Revere's horse, and Thomas Jefferson's pen, and Ben Franklin's eyeglasses, and George Washington's teeth, and liberty, and justice for all. And it is a history predicated on lies. That is the truth about what the country is. When you look at the founding of this country and what has happened since, it is a nation built on stolen land by stolen labor. So it is no wonder that right now the American experiment is failing bigly. There was no way that we could keep going as a young democracy. Some people argue we're our oldest democracy, but for people who look like me, it does not feel like we were a very old democracy. And so some people thought that that could keep going. And I think now we're seeing the cracks in the system, rightfully so. So we have to lock arms together and build it. And the truth is, there are a number of people in this country who would rather see it burn to ashes and be rulers of the ashes before they ever saw somebody who looked like me run it.
Thank you, thank you. And what's critical about that point is that we understand what the reality and the future of the United States actually looks like. There have been a number of studies that have shown that if you address discrimination targeted at Black people alone, we could actually grow our economy by $5 trillion a year over a 5-year period. That's thousands of jobs, billions in local revenues. Why is it that we can't get people mobilized around that understanding, right? Because we have to be honest, people are self-interested. What's good for them is what's good. So what do we do to really amplify that message as an attempt to really connect with some potential persuadables?
So again, just the honesty of it. And we're living at a time where our media outlets are failing us. We on the broadcast side of things, there are 3 stories every day in the echo chamber that are never really explored or discussed. It's a collection of people in sound bites. And even when you look at the people who are on there to help dissect things, everybody gets the same title now. They're a strategist. Well, I've been working in media and politics for 20 years. I ain't never heard of this person. Let me Google them and see where they are. Oh, well, what do they strategize on? Because all I see now is they had a podcast that had about 2,000 listeners for 2 weeks, and some booker found them and said, oh, you're an expert. Let's put you on television. If we had the opportunity to explore and tell people and just break down for a second, because there's also times, and I know growing up, I wanted to be the Brown Murphy Brown. And thank you all for laughing. I say that to my team. I'm gonna tell you, I'm at an age where I say that to people and they're like, oh, who's Murphy Brown? So I wanted to be the Brown Murphy Brown, and I remember looking at the news media thinking, oh, they're not talking to me, they're not talking for me, they're talking to each other. I don't understand all these acronyms. We don't do that in media to break down, hey, this is what's happening. When we talk about the economy, some people think the economy and the stock market are the same thing. When we talk about voters, middle of America voters, there's a different ideology to everybody what middle of America voters means. And so I think the first thing is to inform people. And people are tired. People are exhausted. I know so many people just tune out. It's too much and they tune out. And they'll go vote in November and do what they have to do. But the minutia of it is exhausting. When we look at the landscape I think this gets into power. When you say, how can we convey this information to people? I think there are a significant number of people who know and are just uncomfortable with it. There are a significant number of people who say, okay, I understand that we'll have more money if we let y'all have more money, but I don't want y'all having any more money, so I'm okay staying at this level. I think that's when it comes to what we talked about earlier with just because these demographics are changing, the power structure is still remaining the same. And that's where you get into some really uncomfortable conversations that I think we have to have, like we're having here today. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. But when you look at what was happening around the racial reckoning, it was everyone was celebrating this cultural shift in the country. It was a happy moment for people to feel good about themselves mostly. And what people took away is oh, I know because I saw George Floyd getting murdered and I'm hearing from people, really guys, we need to hire more Black and brown people. We need to make these tables more equitable to Black and brown people. But when you hear that, do you hear that? Because that means the power still rests solely in your hand. That means you are in the position of doing the hiring and we are still perpetually in the position of doing the asking. When you stop celebrating a cultural shift and start celebrating a power shift, you lose some of your amen corner. When the question isn't, oh, we need to hire more Black and brown people, but it's a Black or brown person deciding if they should hire some of you, well, then that's some discomfort for some people. It was kind of like the Black Lives Matter movement was almost a fashion statement for a minute. It was okay to wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, 'cause I'm a proud ally. I'm gonna put the Black Lives Matter poster in my window because I'm a proud ally. But when it came time for some real policy change, for some budget control, for some shifting of policies and laws and practices and changing hearts and minds and confronting cousins and mamas and grandmamas with things that they say, well, then our amen corner got a little more quiet. So I just think we have to keep pressing and pushing people and showing that we are not so satisfied with the breadcrumbs in this country, and people have to accept we're not the side dish. We are not the baked potato. We are the steak. So we all have to coexist on this table together, and it's a tasty meal when we do, but we haven't yet seen that realized across a lot of spaces. And if the thought, I mean, you don't have to say out loud today, but I really hope that people are honest with themselves. If me saying, oh, a Black woman will be deciding if she's hiring you, if that makes you even slightly uncomfortable, ask yourself why. And talk about it amongst yourselves, amongst your friends, in your safe spaces. But that is a real thing that a lot of people have not yet confronted.
Thank you, thank you. And speaking of the power dynamic, the media in our nation is so powerful. You know this. You have tremendous platforms, and you bring a nuanced perspective to these conversations. You clearly understand how we're all interconnected and why it's important for all of us to thrive. The media, as you've already said, not so much. We don't get nuanced stories. We don't get stories that kind of peel back the layers and help people understand. And increasingly, our young people are not even bothering with the media. They're only relying on social outlets or alternative ways to have discussions. What would you recommend the media do to try to reclaim some of the moral authority, and not the false moral authority where we all used to watch the 6 o'clock news and we only had 3 stations and those were the trusted voices, but where it is really a media that's investigating and questioning with legitimacy the power structures in our nation, recognizing itself as a power broker?
Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but I have some experience in being silenced by mainstream media. You can Google it if you didn't get it. But anyway, I would say that the media is powerful, but less so today, because you do have a generation of people tuning out. And let me just explain the landscape, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. Your average cable news viewer is between the age of 62 and 65 and is a white male. Now, if there's anybody who understands enterprise and business in here, you might think, well, that pocket is not immortal, so we had better start creating some programming to expand to include up-and-coming audiences, a more diverse America. For some reason, that has not worked. This whole talk about liberal, conservative media, there is no liberal media, okay? The same on the left and the right, they both prioritize the same people, and that is older, conservative white folks. To the point that I've navigated newsrooms for 20, 25 years. I'm pausing because y'all are supposed to say, what? No way, 25 years? Was she born then? Fine, you missed your cue, it's fine. Anyway, for all those decades, everything, my entire lived experience was discarded. There were so many people who didn't even think I deserved or warranted being there, let alone my perspective and how to change some of these conversations. Even what was considered unbiased was rooted in what's white and male. And so as you look at those platforms, a lot of people, when you don't see yourself reflected, you tune out. So we look at what happened in 2016. If the only time I saw outrage for the past few years about a 12-year-old child being murdered by a police officer was on a Facebook meme, well, then I might start to pay more attention there than I do to CNN. If the only time I heard my lived experience reflected back to me was on an Instagram post, well, then I might start to pay more attention there than I do MSNBC. And that's just the reality. The challenge with that is everyone is not a journalist, and there actually is an art and a science to what we do. And so what was very telling about that time, I think, in 2016, that is when, not the first time, we had a foreign adversary trying to influence our politics. And so Russia sent over, I think, 3 or 4 people. Just go figure out what's happening in America and how can we mess with this election. And it took them, it was the Internet Russia Agency, it took them all of maybe a month to say, oh, I know they treat black folks really bad over there. So let's do that. Let's get black people to stay home, and we're going to target black folks specifically, and that's how you mess up this election. It's data out there. I wrote a whole book on it. It's a lot of information to support it, to the point even our intelligence agencies saw this as well, saw this happening. So there was danger in it because people were so hurt and were so abused that they tuned into bad actors whose intentions were not to inform, but to depress. And so we have to do something. We can't have that, because now, even though it's a good thing that social media so democratized the media landscape, especially when it comes to news, there also comes some challenges with that. And as we enter a world where AI, we don't know what AI is going to do, we haven't seen all its powers yet, that's something to consider. It's a very dangerous landscape. And so what I would ask people is share responsibly. Be sure when you're sharing an article, information, whatever, like check your sources, cite your source. Somebody said on one of our native land posts, they put out some claim about black people voting for Trump. And I responded and I said, well, cite your sources. And the girl responded to my comment and said, cite my sources? This is Instagram. But that is a real, people are the #1 news source for young folks, for Gen Z, TikTok. That's got to make us all a little nervous. It makes us all a little nervous. So I think when you see yourself not reflected, you increasingly tune out. Print media drives a lot of what we see on television. You work in any newsroom, everybody gets up, they read the wires, they read the papers. I read about 8 papers before the sun comes up. And then you watch broadcast news, and it's just an echo chamber. They're not interested in telling our stories. And when I watch people offer their commentary, you can see people are terrified because they themselves center the comfort of white folks. And I will tell you all, if you're watching or listening to somebody who makes you a little uncomfortable talking about these things, that's the person telling the truth. Because you should be there. We got to get comfortable making folks uncomfortable, because we've been uncomfortable for a long time. So everybody to make change, that's growth. Absolutely. So we have a lot of work. I could go on about this. I would throw off your whole agenda if you get me talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, we are so grateful for your brilliance today.
That's it. It's over. I have more to say.
We stand in a posture that we are winning, even though it doesn't feel like it. And voices like yours make it perfectly clear.
You think we're winning?
Absolutely.
Okay, that gives me hope.
Any
concern. Do y'all think we're winning?
Absolutely.
I hear yes, I hear no. Okay, at least we're divided. At least it's not an overwhelming no. Okay, so we're still in the fight.
Well, thank you for being here with us. And audience, please help me in just thanking Tiffany.
Thank you, Nikitra. Thank you, guys.